ready for some Ozploitation? Then you may want to check out Rippy, aka The Red. And this is directed and co-written by Ryan Coonan and stars Kyle Reese himself, Michael Biehn. Now this movie takes place in the outback of Australia somewhere. We have this small rural town, and there have been a couple of killings, and these two guys go out to walk home and they're killed by something. They've been mauled, torn apart, bitten. People can't really figure out what it's all about, and it is in fact a giant zombie kangaroo. And this roo now is terrorising this small community, which is somewhat cut off. It's up to the local police chief, Michael Biehn's sort of character, who's this kind of guy with like severe PTSD, and a couple of others to try and fight off this menace. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss. Okay. So, an Australian creature feature. We've seen a few of those before. Obviously, things like Razorback, Boar, that kind of stuff. Various kind of crocodile movies. But here we have a killer kangaroo. So, it's somewhat of a unique antagonist, you might say. The idea here being it's obviously quite a fast creature. So, that's maybe the thing that it has against those other guys. It's very quick, and this one is particularly kind of giant, and obviously you would expect it normally to be a herbivore really, but this one, oh, it likes the taste of humans. Oh yes. So what can we say that works in this movie's favour? So obviously coming from Australia, you've got these wide open vistas with this kind of like outback kind of setting here that gives it this sense of genuine kind of like a small town feel, surrounded by a whole bunch of nothingness. We do feel these guys, you know, are cut off, they are sparsely prepared. So there's that. So we have this, obviously it being set in Australia, we've got some kind of quite fun sort of Australian characters being stereotypically Australian, I have to say. Obviously, Michael Biehn is from the States, and he's like an ex-Vietnam vet, and he does, quite an earnest performance of a guy who's kind of struggling to sort of keep it together, really, and no one sort of believes him. He's the first one to really see it, but no one kind of believes him because they just put him down to that he's got kind of like mental issues and things like that. But I thought he gave. He's at times a little unhinged, but, he manages to kind of pull it back together. I kind of quite like that. Some of these kangaroo attacks, they're fairly kind of vicious, considering, obviously, not particularly an animal that you would associate with human attacks, but they do manage to make these attacks seem brutal and vicious. I thought this creature could do some damage. We've all seen those pictures of those incredibly muscled kangaroo, so you can kind of imagine, and this one's extra big, you can sort of imagine, these things could cause some damage if they kind of really wanted to, and they do have kind of like sort of sharp claws and stuff. It's a little bit of a mystery about how this thing has sort of come to be. It's given a few hints, but it doesn't explicitly kind of say that, and this is almost kind of like an early zombie kind of movie where we really are dealing with the one sort of creature here, but this particular kind of like alpha creature is particularly kind of virus. Like I said, it's not like a slow plodding one. This is bounding around incredibly fast, which makes it obviously super kind of dangerous and things like that. There's a couple of kind of fun attack sequences and some reasonable kind of practical gore. Okay, what doesn't work? Have you seen the Asylum movie Zombies? Because this movie reminds me of that. Sorry to take you down a peg or two with that, but yes, this kind of reminds me of a more serious Zombies. So let's dive into that a little bit. First of all, serious. This movie is surprisingly very, very taking itself seriously. I mean, there's a couple of like witty, like Aussie humour here and there, but for the actual subject, it's played deadly serious, which I think may have been a little bit of a miscalculation. I mean, this to me needed to be a little bit more campy. The fact that you have a, giant zombie kangaroo, it would lend itself more to a kind of a somewhat of a fun creature feature, but it doesn't. It's kind of, the tone here is kind of quite serious. The creature itself is a CGI creation. And the CGI, I have to say, is relatively rudimentary. And again, if you look at like Zombies, it kind of looks like that. There's some okay gore effects done practically, but the creature itself is, I think, nearly all of the time a CGI creation. And just the kind of the lighting, the animation, I mean, at times it kind of looks a little bit like a cartoon. When we get long shots and it's bouncing around, fine. But I'm surprised you didn't even try to make a more of an effort here to have practical elements to this kind of creature, because I just don't think, especially when we see the close-ups, the CGI is really up to snuff for a kind of a modern movie. As I say, it looks like an asylum movie outside of, you know, it's a more serious film than the asylum would kind of produce. So, you know, there's that. Let's talk about the characters. Our main character here is this female police chief. And she's trying to live up to her father, who was this lauded kind of like guy who everyone kind of viewed as a hero. So she has this sort of personal journey. Now, this is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So there is a positive to this, but there's also a negative. This woman, as a police chief, is actually quite incompetent, it has to be said. She makes some decisions that indirectly gets people killed multiple times. And she's never really held to account with it. In actual fact, there's a couple of sequences where she blames herself, and there's other people going, oh, it wasn't your fault, it wasn't your fault. And I'm thinking, indirectly, it kind of was your fault. So let me give you an example. Let me give you the earliest example, so it's not really a spoiler. We have our first two victims, which are people that were drunk in a bar that she tells to walk home. Okay? Now, she's not to know that there was a killer animal out there, although we are talking about Australia here, so there's got to be something to be said about that. But, you know, we can maybe forgive that. So we get these two people that are killed, and then they examine the bodies, and it's clearly like they've been ripped apart by, there's bite marks. It's clearly not a human, right? Or at least you wouldn't think so. The evidence that doesn't point at this. No evidence of any kind of like edged weapons or blunt force trauma, things like that. So she just arrests this guy who is the only reason that she arrested him is because he has been previously done for manslaughter, and that is it. So it's not even circumstantial. It's kind of like it's a ridiculous reason to arrest someone and put him in jail. I mean, maybe you'd question them, but you would not rule out any other possibilities. But she does, and then someone else gets killed because they're out jogging. So I'm thinking, okay, so that was like sloppy. You know, you've got two people died very violently under mysterious circumstances. You question maybe this guy because he's got a criminal background, but until you've actually concluded, surely you would there's something out here. We've got to kind of be a bit careful, but no. And that's just like the very first example. So this character is flawed, which I think gives the you certainly can't call her a Mary Sue, which is obviously a positive here, but at the same time, you can't help but think this character just isn't a proficient police person, because they just make mistake. There's another one involving driving this kind of van. I don't know. I won't go into it because I don't want to spoil issues. But there's numerous times here where I think there's some poor decisions that are made by this character, which I have to say makes the character somewhat unsympathetic. Acting-wise, I think Bean here is the standout as this kind of more of a complex, layered character. Everyone else isn't necessarily bad, but there's no real kind of performances you think, well, that was a really interesting choice. That character really kind of stood out to me as kind of being particularly kind of grounded and everything. It's all it's okay, but it's nothing really to kind of write home about. And then we get we don't really have, I think there's missed opportunities with this movie as well. So the idea here is there's this one kangaroo, which is a zombie kangaroo. We don't really know why this has happened. I mean, there's a kind of suggestion that it might have been from some type of chemical spill, but that's it, you know. But like, you would have thought the idea that he would have to have a big kangaroo, and this kangaroo is now attacking other kangaroos and turning them into kind of zombie like minions, but that doesn't happen. And it ends up being just one creature, and I don't know. There was an opportunity there to have a really like, oh my god, the odds are really stacked against us, because now we have this kind of like, you know, there's loads of kind of kangaroos in Australia, and these things are all over the place, and they're all infected. Now we've got this kind of like whole rash of them and things like that. Again, I'm assuming this is probably a budgetary reason, but again, it seems like a missed opportunity, and it doesn't really take it. Well, it doesn't take it at all. There's a kind of like a hint to something like that, maybe the very last scene of the movie, but you know, it's a little bit too late by then. Overall, this movie was surprisingly disappointing. It's not a terrible film, but it's surprising. It's missed some slam dunks, if you ask me, and yeah, it ends up being not one of the better Australian kind of creature features. I'll give it a slightly below average score, 4 out of 10. It's not a terrible film. It's watchable, I guess, but don't be expecting really to surpass the level of Zombies there. All right, bye.